Hey guys, I don't know if you're aware of the library feature on chess.com, but I've been saving some games on here. It's basically when you get to the end of the game, you get a little kind of Colosseum, no, not Colosseum, like a Parthenon type thing with pillars and a roof on it, and you can save games to your library to review later. So, for example, I've got 3 here on Smothered Mate. I've got 2 for the Black Mardima Gambit wins. I've got 1 for the Bonetti, 1 win for the awful Bonetti defence that we invented. And here I've got 1 for Front Foot Games. I'm going to have a look in there. I've saved a couple in there recently, and let's just pull up like the last 3. Okay, how does that work then? View. View and view. Notice they're all as white. Okay, and I'm going to go to the start of all of them. It's a bit annoying. Okay, and so what I thought we'd do in this video is just have a look through 3 games where I really tried to take the initiative. Okay, so I do think that the analogy of boxing makes a lot of sense, or any kind of martial art, when there is a lot of point, there's a lot of sense in attacking. If you can use your move, your little chunk of time, to create a threat against your opponent to which your opponent must respond, right? Then there is a chance that your opponent's forced response could be in your favour, could weaken their position or strengthen your position. However, attacking for the sake of attacking in such a way that your opponent's best response is going to strengthen their position is dumb. So we don't want to do that. But attacking does have a lot to say for it. So let's go through 3 games. We'll just try and kind of figure that out as we go along. Okay, so this one is a Vienna Gambit, f4, takes, push, knight retreats. Okay, so here, obviously the threat is the queen out there. So I think d4 is also a good move, but I'm always worried about the queen coming out here, because then if g3, f takes g3, and what do? Right? It might be okay. But here I play knight f3, just taking out these squares from the queen. Okay, and the reason is because Freddie ain't there. Freddie's not home. Okay, so now my opponent plays d6, and I get this quite a lot. So, stop and pause. What do we do in this situation, right? Now, the one thing you don't really want to do is, I've invested 2 moves already in Eddie the e-pawn, okay? So I don't really want to trade Eddie off, particularly as C takes d6 could mean that, black now has his central pawn back. I've already forced him to capture outwards with 1 move, and with that, I've gone down a pawn. So there's not much point me taking on that square, okay? So what is more forceful than that? What puts more pressure on my opponent? Bishop c4. And we will see this, how important this move is shortly, I think. So obviously the thing about putting your bishop on this here diagonal is that it's looking at the f7 square, or in the case of black, you're looking at the f2 square. The key thing about the f pawn, Freddie is weak, right? Freddie has an important job of protecting the king on this flank, okay? But Freddie's only defender is His Majesty himself, okay? Which is why we line up pieces against Freddie. Okay, so bishop e7. Yeah, I mean, look, that bishop only has 1 square to go to, and if black's got ideas about castling kingside, it's got to be done at some point. And this advanced e-pawn, of course, as well, is preventing knight f6. Natural square for the knight. So where's that knight going to go? Okay, so now I play d4. So I'm reinforcing Eddie, yeah? I've got boom, 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 3 pieces out in the board compared to my opponent's 1 piece now. And that's the point of a gambit. The point of a gambit is I get a lead in development in return for him having a pawn, but having had to waste one of his turns to make the capture. Now, if you do that, we said this in the video recently, if you do that, you need to keep on the front foot. You've got to keep the pressure on. You've got to maximize, accelerate the advantage of having that lead in development. Okay, so d4. The other thing about d4 is it vacates this square and allows bishop takes f4, okay, which is going to make your opponent think. And now look, because I left Eddie there, the knight's only got 1 route out into the board, okay, but it's not great because bishop takes f4, and now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 minor pieces out in the board, right? He's got a weak bishop and a useless knight. Now he takes, again, giving up the opportunity to develop, right? And this is the whole point of the gambit approach. He takes, big choice here. I've got 3 pieces that can recapture on this pawn. What would you do? Pawn takes would leave me with an isolated pawn on e5, okay, and would maybe invite a trade of queens, which isn't bad for me because I get a rook on an open file, okay, that's okay. Bishop takes is also an idea because then I'm looking at this pawn and the rook behind it, but if bishop takes, my bishop comes off this diagonal. So one thing I'm thinking about is he can't really castle at this point. Remember, I've only used 35 seconds of my time so far. It's a 5-minute blitz game, yeah? I have to do something, but that removes the opportunity to take the knight and eliminate his g-pawn, which has to go to h6, yeah? So, I take with the knight. Also, another consideration is, knights being short-range pieces like to be up close to your opponent's king if they're going to be attacking, and attacking is the name of the game here, right? So now black plays knight d7. Look, he's only got 1 piece in front of the 7th rank. Only got 1 piece. He's got no space whatsoever. So space is how many squares in your opponent's side of the board do you control? And the answer is many, many, many. All of these are under my control, actually, you know? So he's really on the back foot, and he's sitting there, and he hasn't even got his pawn anymore because my bishop took it back, yeah? So that's why I love gambits. And now, an aggressive castling move, and this is very common with the Vienna gambit because Freddie ain't there, Freddie ain't home, okay? So castling kingside, suddenly the rook is straight there on a semi-open file. Knight now to f6, okay, and he's still got dreams of castling. So what would you do here? Boom, bishop takes h6, pawn takes h6, and now, seriously, you're going to castle and put your king there? I don't think so, right? But now, look, stunning. Bishop takes f7, right? Because look, this knight was the only defender excuse me, apart from the king, of Freddie, yeah? And I've got that and that. And that's because I recaptured with the knight, yeah? Moved my knight up the board, moved my knight to the 5th rank, where it is able to attack the 7th rank, yeah? So after this, the only defender of Freddie is now his match. And boom, you know, you're in trouble. King can't go here because my knight is guarding it, yeah? Very important. King f8 is forced. Now queen d2. Looks like a quiet move, but it ain't because I'm threatening to capture on h6. Queen comes out, queen h6, checkmate. It's all over. King can't go there or there because of the bishop defended by the knight. Can't here, can't stay where he is. Checkmate, all over. Thank you very much for playing. Good night. Okay. Let's check out game number 2. So I think that the game we just saw, I just played this morning. This is another Blitz game, right? And Blitz is great. Okay, Vienna Gambit, accepted. Okay, knight back. Again, knight f3. And now we have d5. d5 is a bit more aggressive, right? He's striking out for the centre, trying to control these two squares. Okay. Now I have the option here of capturing en passant, but I don't. d4, solidify my centre. Okay, and as we saw before, bishop takes f4 is now on. Bishop comes out pinning the knight against the queen. I'm not even concerned. Develop and capture my piece. So, again, this is why I love this gambit. Yeah, look at me. I've got 1, 2, 3 minor pieces out and 2 pawns. This guy, 1 minor piece and 1 pawn. What have you been doing all this time? Yeah. So he used his move to capture a pawn with a pawn, which has then disappeared and evaporated from the board. But my capture came with development, and my piece is still on the board. That's why I've got that much more stuff out on the board. Okay, now we play c6, bishop d3. Right, eyeing down there towards h7. Knight d7, we saw in the last game as well. And now I kick the bishop. h3. What are you going to do? If bishop takes here, I've got options. I mean, I could recapture with the pawn, but that would leave me with an isolated pawn. I could recapture with the queen, which comes with development. Also allowing long castles as an idea. Okay, so he doesn't do that, and I double kick. Right? Remember, this is front foot chess. So we want to put pressure on constantly. Bishop g6, and now we trade bishops. And he recaptures with the h pawn. What this means now is he's got an island of pawns on the f and g files. Right? So, queen d3. Effectively ices this pawn. Right? I guess it could come here. But this is now no longer possible because the queen takes there with check. All right, now, another knight move. So he's spent 2 moves on this knight already. Okay, and you can see by the board the how behind he is in development. Okay, so now I castle long. Obviously, right? Get my rook onto here. Centralize the rook. That's one of the nice things about castling queenside. So you get a rook immediately into the central 2 squares, right? When you castle kingside, your rook ends up on the f file, and then rook e1 or rook e8 costs you another turn. Okay, knight comes in. Move number 3 for the queen's knight. Okay, it's the only piece he's got out in the board. Why has he spent 2 extra moves to put a knight here? What's it doing? Bugger all, as far as I can tell. Okay, and he could have spent those moves developing this bishop and this knight and getting ready to castle, or queen and castle this way, you know. So he's definitely neglecting his development. He spent 1 minute 10 out of a 5-minute game, and this is a 1300 player. Okay, now rook f3, rook h2, sorry, rook h to f1. Why f1? Well, it's semi-open. My opponent, the only pawn on that file is my opponent's pawn, which is a pawn that I can capture. It's also a sensitive pawn because it's Freddy, yeah? Now, putting a rook behind my own pawn, yeah, there's an argument for that, but that limits the scope of my rook to here, right? Because I can't capture that. In theory, this has a lot more scope. Okay, so now he brings out his queen, and excuse me. And the obvious threat is queen takes b2, which would be mate, because the knight's covering this square, so we can't allow that. b3 comes with the bonus of kicking the knight away. Move number 4 for the errant knight. Okay, and now, remember, front foot, e6. The king isn't castled. And when the king is not castled, what do we want to do? We want to bust him open. We want to peel him out of his little shell. Okay? And now pawn takes. Remember I spotted earlier on this move. Queen takes g6, check. Okay, and now he's in a world of pain. Okay? I've got a bishop gunning down this diagonal. I've got knights ready to jump in, right? I've got potentially a rook on here. Let's see the end of the game. King comes here. Bishop g5 check. Okay. And now he's in a double line, double diagonal. So he can't progress that way. He has to come this way to here or here. All right. Now knight e5 check. Okay. And this is the difference of having your pieces developed out into the board. Right. My knight was developed on f3, and now one more move, and it's a threat. Yeah. These pieces aren't developed at all. Okay. Now the bishop could do something, but that's why you want to get your knights out. Your knights are useless on the back rank unless they're going to play a purely defensive role. King moves back again. Queen f7 check. King has to come here. Okay. So if the king comes on the back rank, I just get a free bishop, and the king has to come back here again. King comes here, no good. Queen d7 check and mate. Thank you very much. Game over. Let's look at game number 3. Are we going to get another Vienna? We are not. Pirz. The Pirz defense. Surely, Ben, that is a lot more boring and dull than the Vienna. Yes, it is, listener. Of course it is. Right, anyway, but let's see what we can do. d4, occupy the centre. Knight f6, knight c3, defending the king's pawn. Yeah. Hands off my Eddie. Now c6. This is like, this is actually a 10-minute rapid game, okay, so we've got slightly more time. The check defence. Okay, knight f3. Now he throws out his queen. Generally risky. Yes, he's pinning my knight, right? But that queen could be a target. So bishop d3. Okay, this is not an immediate threat. Yeah, the knight's pinned. But bishop d3 allows me to castle. No more pin. Happy days. Bishop out to g4, pinning my knight. Okay, so now both my knights are pinned. Let's kick at the bish. Takes. Okay, now we have options. We've got queen takes, or we've got g takes, right? What's the most aggressive? Well, here I take with the g pawn. It gives me a spare f pawn, right, which could be used to kamikaze his way up the board and swap himself off, with me retaining my pawn centre. Queen takes would probably be as good as well. So here he's probably going for this. Still not sure what she's doing over there on the side of the board. Okay, and now f4. So with this, he's advertising the fact that he's going to fianchetto his bishop and castle kingside, right? So I'm like, okay, let's go after this pawn. Whenever this pawn is pushed, the g pawn is pushed, yeah? The king's likely to go that way. This pawn becomes a target. You should think about attacking that pawn. Freddie can do it, Harry can do it, right? We want to take out this pawn and expose that king. Okay, so now we have fianchetto and e5. So you see what I just said? Even though I haven't reviewed this game, we're looking at this fresh, yeah? Now if d takes, f takes, and I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns all in a row, and the original Freddie is still there, so I've actually got a 6 and a solo here. But look at Black's king. Black's king's got to go that way if he's going to castle. If he isn't going to castle, what's this rook going to do? Difficult. This rook's still trapped in as well. And he's played c6, which is a slightly odd move. But anyway, he's got an issue now. He's got to resolve the problem with his knight. Pawn takes, doesn't matter. Freddie 2 takes, the return of Freddie. Yeah? And now still the same problem, right? And he can't go here, he can't go here, and this is a bad square. So where's he going to go? He goes here, right? Now, obviously that puts 2 attackers on this knight. It only had 1 defender in the form of this. So right now, as things stand, if knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, it's a fork on king and rook. That wouldn't be nice. So queen d2. I think bishop d2 would also... Excuse me, bishop d2 would also have been an option, leaving me the opportunity of maybe something like this with my queen. Maybe that would be a better move, but takes. And now queen takes. Queen takes, b takes. You can see the same thing again, right? I've captured towards the center again. And I have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns in the center for channels. He's got 3, right? That's because I've had 2 captures towards the middle of the board. Right, and now the queens are off. But I have quite a nice level of control over the center now, right? And I have a bishop developed. My opponent has 1 bishop fianchettoed that's looking down a dark square pawn chain. So not the cleverest bishop in the world. Black now castles, and I throw Harry up the board, right? Now castling is not so much of an issue once the queens are off the board, right? Because there's the threat level goes down quite a lot when the queens come off. So, however, it does release the rook. So it's one way to release the rook. Another way to release the rook could be something like king here, and then use another move to centralize the rook. And that has the advantage of having a more centralized king towards the end of the game, rather than a king in the corner towards the end of the game. In the ending, you want your king centralized. You want your king to come towards the middle because it's a powerful piece. You want it to support your pawn pushes. You want it to defend against your opponent's pawn pushes. Anyway, he castles, Harry goes off, h5, pretty much forced. He can't allow me to play h5 and attack this pawn. So h5. Bishop comes out, knight comes out. Line up the rook against the king. Knight to here. a4 now, right? Up come the pawns. Right, so now he's attacking an undefended pawn on c3 and my dark squared bishop. King d2, right? A very natural looking move would be to retreat the bishop to here. But if you do that, I'm using my bishop, which is one of my only long range pieces, yeah, to nursemaid a lowly pawn. Another option would have been c4, attack the knight, but then the knight might have taken off my bishop and I lose the bishop pair for the endgame. So king d2 takes my king 1 step further towards the center of the board as well. And now he does decide to take out my bishop. No worries, king takes, right? Yes, again, f takes would have been an option, but king takes gets me another step towards the middle of the board, right? So I'm not too worried about defense here. My opponent is worried about defense. You know, he's castled his king, put him safe in the corner with a fianchetto bishop, all that kind of stuff. I'm all about coming after my opponent. And this move, b6, not really convinced by that. One of the problems with that is if I can get my bishop here, right, I'm attacking the rook and this pawn and this square, right? So how does he defend this pawn? He can't. He has to put his rook on one of these squares and then bishop takes pawn. Anyway, so that's a little tactic there. Rook g2, what am I planning? Doubling the rooks on the same file as my opponent's king-a-ling. He moves his rook across, rook a to g1. Now he pushes a pawn. Whoop-de-doo, I'm not impressed, okay? Because I've got spare pawns, I've got spare c-pawn. I've got Charlie 1 and Charlie 2. Drop my bishop back. So the idea here is, at some point, maybe capture that pawn if we can pin this guy. So bishop to here, check, f4. You see how everything is forwards, 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 right? I don't think I've moved a piece backwards at this point. f4, and what does that mean? If this bishop has vacated this square, that's now pinned, okay? Can't move. And now I've got this as a very real threat. Remember how the h5 was forced earlier on, so he's got to move his bishop back to g7. I take the pawn anyway, because pawn takes, rook takes bishop, okay? I win a pawn. Rook takes bishop, check, king has to move to the h file. So now maybe desperation sets in, who knows? C takes d4, c takes d4, and look at my king. Yeah? Happy in the middle of the board, protecting his dark squared pawns, all these dark squared pawns. This bishop's got nothing. This bishop has 2 squares, and they're both rubbish, yeah? My rook's defending this, and I've got both rooks lined up against my opponent's king. Now he grabs my bishop, okay? I guess here I could have simply retreated my bishop. Don't know why I didn't. Well, because I get that, that's why. King is forced to move to h8, that's the only square. Rook g5. It doesn't matter now what black does. Rook takes, h5 is check and mate. Yeah. So there you go. 3 games from my library. Now, I don't think there's a way to share your library. It'd be great for me to say to you guys, here, go and browse my library of games if you want to look at, different tactics or different styles of games. I don't know if there is a way on chess.com to allow somebody to do that. If you know of a way, please let me know. But apart from that, enjoyable, approach to chess. This is really something that I'm trying to do more, and particularly spotting these forced wins, right? Like this, for example. With that, bang, bang, rook back to here is important for, because I couldn't play rook here, because then if this rook takes the pawn, king takes that rook, so yeah. But with this move, he can't stop checkmate on the next move. And that is something that is just that finish him off step in the chess that I'm really trying to work on myself right now. So hope that's been interesting for you, going through a few front foot games with me. Obviously you can't play that way all the time. If your opponents are playing well and they are throwing punches at you that you've left room for them to do, you've given them space and options to do that, you can't always attack. But all other things being equal, if you can advance towards your opponent, put pressure on your opponent, right? It actually makes life easier for you as the game progresses. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you later.